Hello again, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. So, what is your roadmap and strategy for how you handle data? Marketers and brands are awash in data today, but are you leveraging it correctly to grow your business? Do you have the right kind of tech? And is your data clean? Are you treating your data responsibly and prepared for the changing laws to come that will affect your marketing and advertising efforts? Bruce Biegel is the Senior Managing Director of the Winterberry Group, a strategic consulting firm, and he's the subject matter expert in data strategy and in marketing and advertising services. And on this episode, we'll discuss the state in the data industry, data privacy, GDPR, CCPA, MarTech attribution, strategies for growth, and much, much more. So let's tune in to a data expert with a data-driven shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Bruce, thank you so much for joining me today on A Shark's Perspective. So tell us a little bit about your background in data and what's your career to date.
So I have been in the data industry now for over 20 years. I actually started on Wall Street in information technology. Then I went on to start a marketing technology company in digital out-of-home media, where I ran marketing and sales, and then we sold that company. And I went off and was an early founder of a company called Think Direct Marketing, which was a data company that was seed funded by Axiom. And served as president and COO there for 4 years. We sold that, and I had some friends in the investment banking world who said, "What would you like to do next?" And I said, "There's a place for management consultants who understand the advertising, marketing, information, and media business from the inside, who can provide consultation to the suppliers, to the brands, and to the financial investors." And that was the genesis of Winterberry. Fast forward 16 years, 400 engagements later, I lead our practice. I probably led 200 of those engagements.
Obviously, there are a lot of different types of companies that help with data, but as a management consulting firm, how does Winterberry Group help companies look and work with their data?
About 40% of what I do is working for the data companies, the agency holding companies, all the way down to print letter shops, ad tech, martech, helping them with growth strategy, understand their business. And because we're so deep in the sector, we can move very, very quickly. You don't have to teach us the industry. We need to understand your business. So if that's 40%, another 25%, along the way, brands got a hold of us and said, "Since you understand the data and technology landscape and you know the suppliers, could you help us with our roadmap? Help us understand what do we need, when do we need it, and who should we work with in order to enable this for us?" And it's typically enterprise brands like L'Oreal, Citi, Time Warner, Cap One, folks like that. The third group that found us along the way were the private equity investors. And we do commercial diligence for them, primarily on the suppliers. We do this on a global basis. So we will come in and we'll do an assessment for business. We will look at management, the market, help to educate the investors as they think about spending somewhere between $50 million and $5 billion on an investment. And so that's become about a third of our practice now.
Sure.
The last thing that we do is when we see that there are questions that are troubling the market or confusion, we will partner or we will look for sponsors to write on topics. So we wrote the first white paper on data. We sized the data market. We partnered with the IAB. We worked with the ANA. I was on the board of the DMA for 6 years. We just published a paper on customer data platforms, CDPs. So we're always looking and saying, well, what's coming next? And what should we help the market understand? So we don't do waves or quadrants. We're not a Forrester or a Gartner, but we're really looking to help educate the market.
Bruce, there's so many changes happening today in the data industry. Dentsu just bought Merkle and then figured out they weren't a data company, but instead a data-driven marketing agency. And LiveRamp kicked the parents out of the house, and now my alma mater, Axiom, lives within the IPG umbrella and Publicis paid a lot for Epsilon, second biggest deal I think ever in the business. But who knows what'll happen to the Equifaxes and Experians of the world? And there are also a ton of data agencies that claim to have a lot of data, and most of them, I'd say, 99% of them were just buying a list and then appending something to it with some of their agency data and then calling it a better list. But with all that being said, sort of define, if you will, the transformation of the data agency industry and that whole world a little bit for us, and where we are with data as a whole.
So, we've watched this market evolve. And so when I got involved in the data industry, it was primarily data for direct mail.
Yeah.
So I was, looking at how do we sell a list? And we're doing this for acquisition. How do you build a database? So we went from pretty much a single channel use of data. Then the second channel that was added was email. People started to say, oh, I'm going to do email and I'm going to start to segment. I'm going to apply some of the techniques of direct marketing and direct mail to the data that surrounds email so that I could be a better emailer. The third wave started in around 2009, and this is when we started to see that same data and that same segmentation start to be applied to the digital display, the programmatic market. And that market, it took a couple of years because the traditional media people really didn't understand this type of data.
Mm-hmm.
And so they needed to become educated. At the same time, the platforms needed to get better at managing data. And we saw the introduction of data management platforms,
Mm-hmm.
DMPs. And the DMP served to feed the programmatic platforms. And so the next big wave of data started as display, video, mobile, et cetera, grew over the last 5 years. What we've seen is a channel that has been growing 20 to 30% a year
Yeah.
in terms of how it uses data. So now you have three large categories. You have direct mail, which is still there, and you have email, and you have display, transforming the market.
So one of the biggest things impacting a lot of the conversation of data right now, obviously, is GDPR. And I know a story I read recently that was based on a poll survey that government regulation was the top obstacle threatening marketers' data projects this year, according to the survey that Winterberry and the IAB did together. So GDPR really stirred the pot, if you will, on data and privacy. Culturally, the Europeans approach it so much very differently. But then California started similarly, and now other states are considering similar options. Unpack, if you will, what data privacy will look like over the near to long term and how that will really affect marketers and advertisers who are looking to leverage data for their campaigns.
So a couple of thoughts on this. And I just came back. I spent a week in Europe having conversations around this
Mm-hmm.
and the impact of GDPR, which is now almost 12 months later. With GDPR in Europe, your large brands look and say, can I manage the two privacy regimes? No, I'm going to manage the GDPR. So if you're global, you already have to take it into consideration. In this market, CCPA passed, it's going into effect. 14, 15 other states have various pieces of regulation. Yeah, there's a privacy coalition that has been assembled around the DAA, the Digital Advertising Alliance, the IAB, the ANA, and they're uniting with the brands and the suppliers to lobby Capitol Hill to pass privacy-friendly regulation at the federal level.
Mm-hmm.
Because marketing across 50 different privacy regimes will be next to impossible unless you happen to have a lot of personal information on people and you don't need to go to third-party data or even do enhancement. So a distributed privacy regime across all the states would favor Amazon, would favor Facebook, would favor Google. So the walled gardens would be the beneficiaries of that type of distributed privacy environment. So we think is going to happen is we will get government regulation. It will look something in between GDPR and CCPA. It will give people the right of preference to have their data destroyed, to let somebody use it. Um, and I think it's going to come in the next 12 months. I don't think this is a topic that can wait a long time. I think even this government may be able to pass privacy regulation.
What are your thoughts around blockchain then? With we're still at the theoretical stage, but when you look at that and how consumers will take back some of their data, does that come up in conversation with your clients very often?
Um, it did for a while, and then it went away
Yeah,
because blockchain kind of got very quiet. I think where we're really watching blockchain is attribution,
yeah.
and and being able to
Which is the
use
whole purchase,
blockchain.
to use it as a ledger.
Yes, use it as a ledger to validate and verify that the ad was actually seen, and to be able to record. So I think the attribution side of marketing, long before we get to payments and order processing, I think blockchain has a very important role to play there, and we're starting to see some startups go into tests with the media agencies. So
Hmm.
so it's something we're watching as probably the first use case for blockchain.
There was a survey over 100 plus digital marketers, again by the IAB, and you that analytics and measurement tasks were the use cases that marketers expected would occupy most of their time and attention this year. And Kel surprised, but the study had the same results last year, at least as far as the top of what they thought would be. And we have a lot, and I say a lot in all caps, of marketers and companies swimming awash in data right now. And I think it's safe to say that most are drowning in it with no idea of what direction to swim in to really reach and understand attribution. And where do you see attribution heading with what kind of advice would you give so that people can start looking at doing better attribution, because they've got a lot of data. Most of the time it's not clean. They don't know what technology platforms to go with, but it's a big major concern that gets half the CMOs fired because they don't know where their ad spend went.
And I think that's what's driving it. Is I need to be more efficient with my advertising spend, my working media spend, the way I allocate that spend across channels. It's not about I want to spend less money. I want to spend more efficiently and more effectively. And I can't do that if I can't do attribution.
Exactly.
If you go back to direct marketing and matchbacks, what's working, where is it working? The people who come from that discipline were testing all the
All
time.
the time. Yes.
And so in that test and learn culture, you need the ability to do attribution. In the digital world, yes, if I'm doing a single channel, I just want to see if my email's working and I just care about email. That's one thing. But if I'm trying to do cross channel or omni-channel attribution, incredibly hard because I have massive data sets that are massively incomplete. So while my objective is I need to understand what's working and what's not and how better to engage, this is a journey. This is not, hi, we're just going to get there. If you think back, we had 3 years. It was the year of mobile. It was the year of mobile, and it was the year of mobile, and it was the year of mobile, and all of a sudden it was like, of course it's mobile.
Yeah.
I think attribution, if we're in the second year of the year of attribution, we probably have another couple of years because attribution is hard.
It is. It is. It is so hard to look at the full journey, and I think people would be surprised, to be quite honest. So your team gives a lot of consulting advice as a firm. How do you find growth before you can grow it? I know this is a topic you and I discussed earlier, but I really thought that was an interesting way of providing advice to companies that have a lot of data and need to start looking at it.
Yeah, so you're trying to find growth for your business, and you can look at the data, but ultimately you need to do the research. You need to understand what your starting point is. So going through a process of discovery to understand what you have, and then deciding on what your destination is. What are my primary business objectives? Whether it's acquisition, retention, analysis, etc. So knowing where you want to go and what use cases you want to solve for, once you have that mapped, you can now say, all right, I can take this and I can build that roadmap for growth. But you have to have a beginning and you have to have an end point in mind. The end point should be tied to your business outcomes.
One of the things that I've seen over my career, and I'm sure you have seen this plenty as well, is you have a lot of groups internally within teams that are siloed. Maybe they work with, certain agencies. Another group works with another agency. And by the time you get done, those brands may have, if you're a large brand, a lot of agencies, and they're all working a lot of directions. You'd love to believe that all of them were working with a sort of single source of data that they could use for targeting a lot of their advertising efforts, but they're not. And from that angle, what kind of advice do you give advertisers and agencies on how to use data in more of a cleaner omni-channel type approach so that they don't have disparate targeting and messaging across the board?
Right? We like to joke that you can't do omnichannel in a silo.
Yeah,
It
agreed.
doesn't work that
No,
way.
I've heard that. Yeah,
So having a separate digital marketing group, a separate advertising and paid media group, direct mail and direct marketing off in another area, servicing. You need to centralize the data so that there's one unified view of the customer, and you can now push that back into each of those groups. We're not going to say that we can eliminate the differences of execution or the roles and responsibilities, but everybody should work off the same data platform at the center so that you have a consistent experience for the customer. And I may be using this for email and you may be using this for direct mail, et cetera. But if we're working off the same data and we're doing the same attribution, we're going to be much smarter about how we communicate. So we think that while collapsing the silos across an entire organization is hard, you should be able to centralize the data layer.
agreed. Then let's transition a little bit and talk about technology that you mentioned earlier. What's happening with data technology today? Another piece of this puzzle specifically is technology, and so many brands think they need a platform, but they don't think about how to integrate the data, or honestly know where to start, in my opinion, because so many of them have, I'm going to say, dirty data, not clean data that they need to cleanse and hygiene and then ingest into a system. But what are the conversations that you're having with brands today to start pointing them in the right data direction with data technology?
I think the first thing that happens is they jump to what I want to do with the data, therefore I need this
Yeah,
platform. And that platform, whether it is an email platform, campaign management, personalization, whatever the application layer is, those platforms need to have good data to ingest so they can deliver the outcomes that are desired. Problem is most people are jumping to the application layer without solving for the data layer first.
absolutely.
And so the very first thing is, what data do I have? And if I've found it, which takes a long time for a lot of these companies, once I found the data, I need to make sure the data is clean. So I need to run through the hygiene process. So very first step, dirty data. If I put it in a database, I still have a crappy database.
Mhm.
So I need to make sure that I ingest it, that I normalize it, that I clean it, and then I can sort whether that is personally identifiable PII data or that is non-PII, it's web data, it's unstructured. It's still, you clean it to the best extent possible. Then I can put it in a repository. So from a technology standpoint, depending on the size of the database, whether I'm B2C or B2B, I'll think about what platform. And part of what has confused the market is the rise of customer data platforms, or CDPs. People say, oh, that's my customer database. That's actually not what they are. You know, they are for ingesting, they are for managing, they are for working with data in real time, which a customer database was never designed to do. One is a repository, one is a way to move the data into the application layer. And CDPs have confused the market, especially because those applications, if they had to manage data, They started saying, oh, we're a CDP.
Hmm.
And then all the marketing clouds have announced CDPs. So now
Yeah,
Salesforce has a CDP,
Salesforce,
and
sure.
Adobe and Oracle, they all have CDPs. Does that mean they should be my marketing database? No. It means that they have to move data around so they can put it into the applications, whether that application is for attribution or activation across channels. So the data layer needs to have those activation, that ability to make the data active. It needs to have storage. And it also needs a repository where I can just go look at stuff. And that's the BI and analytics side.
It also shows that so many brands and advertisers, to your point, look at it the application layer first and then don't know that they have a problem and then just have a bunch of data and think let's let that go fix it. And CDPs are great, but they're not CRMs and they're not supposed to be. And that's the irritating part that I've found with a lot of brands I've spoken with.
Right. And look, some of the mid-market brands, their challenge is they only have so much money.
Yeah.
And they may have started off in the digital world. They never had a database.
Mm-hmm.
They started doing email. They built a database. It was an email first database. And then they outgrew it and it started to crash the application. And they said, oh, I need to now move this into another place because there's too much data here, and or I need to be able to use this data for servicing my clients, for working with the call center, et cetera. So we went from single use to that multiple use that we talked about earlier. And I think that's driving some of the transformation. But there are some applications that do a good enough job if you have a limited amount of data where you can get away with an application to work with your data, but not once you grow up and certainly not when you're an enterprise.
Agreed. So when you look into your crystal ball, what is the outlook that you see with data, both in the near and long term?
I think in the near term, we are seeing, there are about 450 companies in the US market that we track that are involved in data, whether that's in the brokerage of data, the management of data,
That is
the data
insane.
services marketing
450
market.
companies.
It's about 450, but you think probably 200 to 300 of those are really more in that brokerage
Right,
business.
exactly.
That's down from 800 20 years ago. So there's been a huge amount of compression in that market. But anyway, what we think is the that data services, which is database management, the application of data technology, analytics, those services around data, the demand just increases. And part of it is if I need to be privacy compliant, managing my data properly goes from a nice to have to an absolute need to have. This is what happened in Europe because if you don't manage it right, you can get sued. Now all of a sudden, the CFO and the head of compliance are the ones saying, where's your data management? How come you don't have a chief privacy officer? So we went from people who didn't really care to people who care a lot. And so we think that we're going to get growth in the data services market, very steady and continued. We think the agencies, as we can see from their buying behavior, whether it was Dentsu buying Merkle or IPG buying Axiom or Publicis buying Epsilon, the agencies have gotten this data services religion and some of the data religion. The data market itself, we think that there is a huge amount of runway. There are so many new types of data coming on the market,
Mm-hmm.
permissioned properly and used responsibly. They give you great signals about what people want. So we're very bullish on the market over both near and long term, but people have to treat data responsibly.
Agreed. So you as a consumer, not just as somebody who works in the industry, what are your personal concerns about how data is used? What are the things that make you feel uncomfortable?
What makes me feel uncomfortable right now is the amount of data that lives within some of the walled gardens,
Yeah, agreed.
um, because they have not necessarily proven themselves to be responsible, and they're monetizing my data.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they have permission, and maybe they don't. So I think that is a bigger concern. The data that was used for direct mail, et cetera, you know what, that data was fine. I do worry about fraud and risk as a consumer, much more than I worry about privacy.
Interesting.
You know, is somebody going to steal my data and use it in a way that's going to have a negative impact on me, whether that's credit, you know, so I think that worries me much more than, oh, are you going to use it to send me an ad that's targeted or not targeted? I would rather have targeted advertising, especially from brands that I trust and respect, and especially on media properties that I think are responsible. But what worries me is fraud and risk.
Well, Bruce, you live near the beautiful palm trees in Southeast Florida when you're not traveling all over the world and speaking or consulting. But what is your favorite kind of shark and why?
What is my favorite kind of shark? Very, very small sharks.
Very small sharks.
Very small sharks.
There you go. Well, Bruce, it's that special time in the show. Are you ready for the five most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Ready.
All right. Number one, leveraging data for targeting or leveraging data for attribution?
Targeting.
Mojitos or Manhattans?
Mojitos.
Thank you. Number three, first-party data or third-party data?
First-party data.
Number four, General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, or the CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act?
GDPR.
Thank you. And the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Cornbread.
Thank you. Cornbread goes better with Cuban food. So, Bruce, where can people find out more about you, download some of the great research that your group, Winterberry Group, has, and more?
So you can find us at winterberrygroup.com, or you can look for me on LinkedIn or at Biegel, Biegel, at winterberrygroup.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Bruce, so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Kenneth, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time today.
So there was my conversation with Bruce Biegel, the Senior Managing Director of the Winterberry Group, a strategic consulting firm, and he's a subject matter expert in data strategy and in marketing and advertising services. Let's take a look at three key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, so what will data privacy look like to marketers in the near term? Bruce's point of view was that we'll see a blend of some national legislation somewhere between Europe's GDPR and the California Consumer Privacy Act. Makes perfect sense as he goes on to describe how it would be nearly impossible to navigate 50 separate state laws. But as he went on to later say, he's worried more about the misuse of his data than privacy. I would simply recommend that all brands go as far as possible to both protect and prevent misuse. There's not a brand I've seen who didn't have massive room for improvement on how they handle data. Don't let a consumer's data ever be weaponized by some third party because of misuse. Always treat customer data responsibly. Fraud, risk, and privacy all are extremely important. Second, attribution should be and often is one of the most important concerns for marketers today. When speaking of how companies often take a look at that today, Bruce said, it's not about I want to spend less money. I want to spend more efficiently and more effectively. And I can't do that if I can't do attribution. Completely agree. The way your brand handles data is one of the most critical factors in whether or not your brand can properly attribute any to all of your spend. Start with your data. Third, you've heard me do many shows on MarTech and how we leverage data with tech. CDPs have been great, but marketers need to understand what a CDP is and what it is not. It's not a CRM. And this also goes true with all types of tech. It's a real-world challenge, though, as he describes, because of limited budget, and I've seen that often as well. Understanding the use cases for what you want to do with your data will help you better understand what type of tech to buy, whether it's a CDP, CRM, data lake, data warehouse, etc. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. It's been my honor to spend this time with you. Guys and girls, it's all about the ones and the zeros in the data. So join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.